Hey, welcome back. My name is Thomas Pichel, Professor Pichel, and this is my lecture on William Faulkner's A Rose for Emily. My lecture title is The Invisible Watch. Okay, this is a challenging story. I want to start right away with theme. Remember, theme is the idea that a story is about. It is the concept that the story revolves around. Uh, I think once again, I'm going with my running, I guess, theme of my own, and that is easy themes or first guesses or attractive themes. And I think that a first guess that a lot of people jump to on this story is death, right? Well, if you think about it, death can be applied to anything. You might even think unrequited love, right? That the love between Emily and Homer, the screwed up love between Emily and her father. But once again, love can apply to just about any story. So with this story, I'm going to go with the theme of decay and the passage of time. And decay happens when physical things stay static for a long time, which is what we see with Emily's house, Miss Emily's house. We also see it with Miss Emily herself. Okay, so there's a certain static nature to the whole story. The only progression that we have is slow decay and falling into ruin. So think about this. And my other theme is the deification of a person. And typically, this means making somebody into something like a god. Now, Miss Emily may seem a strange choice for a demigod or god or goddess, but if you know your mythology, there are all types of gods and goddesses. They're not always perfect, especially if we're talking Greek and Roman myth. But certainly, even if you look at the saints of the Catholic Church, many of them were very flawed, imperfect people and sinners. And they have churches named after them. They have devotions, all those sorts of things. So bear with me and I will go through the decay imagery and the religious imagery. If we put them together, what we get is a decayed religion, a decayed belief system, which we could say is the noblesse oblige of the South. And you can read the footnote in your book on that. It's also the class societies, the class of society in the South, classes of society, I should say. You have the what really are sort of like the Southern nobility. We have no nobility in the U.S., but we kind of do. And in the South, they pretty much modeled their society on English society. So they were sort of obsessed with nobility and royalty, even though in the U.S. we don't really have those in the form that they appear, say, in Europe. So let's see. I'm going to talk about plot first of all. The plot is very interesting. If you're going to write about this story or do an investigation of the story, you have to consider plot. Okay, the plot is achronological, meaning that events do not occur in linear time order. We get them in five sections in the text. Let me just make sure that um, no, four sections. There's only four sections in here. I thought my notes were right. So we have four sections in this text, right? And time order is mixed up. And believe me, I have tried many times to figure out the time order of this story, and I've read other experts try to analyze it, and it remains nebulous. And I think this goes back to the idea of that invisible watch. We think we understand time. We think we have a fix on time. But remember, time is also a function of memory. We know that there's physical time, but time occurs in memory, and our memory rearranges and categorizes time. especially concerning past events from our lives for history. So I'm going to go quickly through the sections just to get us going. In the first section, it's present time in the story's fiction universe, right? It is the occasion of Miss Emily's death. So we haven't even got to meet this character yet, and she's already dead. Uh, this section is fairly short, and then we move on to section 2, which is 30 years before those aldermen come to collect her taxes. If you recall, uh, when Emily was left bereft and only had the house, probably a small allowance left over from the Grierson once fortune, which is gone now. Uh, Colonel Sartoris gives her an edict saying that she does not have to pay taxes in perpetuity, right? And we know that this is a special deal. This is not law, and law is mentioned quite a bit through this text. If you keep your eyes out, the actual term law is mentioned quite a bit. Not term law, but law itself. Okay, so after we go back 30 years before they came for the taxes, we are in a time when Miss Emily is much younger, she's thinner. We imagine she could even be attractive. We don't know. We know that as she stays the same, she does transform into something of a monstrous person. And when I talk about characters, I'll get back to that. So, section 3 comes in, and this is a long time after her father's death. So, this has been many years. And this is long after the section 2 happens, right? Um, and then finally we get to, oh, there is a section 5, sorry. My notes are screwed up. Okay, so there is a section 5. And we get to inch 4, we get 4 begins right after Homer's disappearance. So once again, this would be in the past. Homer Barron is uh, you can imagine him as a contractor or a um, manager of construction crews. His crews are black, and they sing, and he kind of keeps them motivated and cusses at them and those sorts of things. So, that's what we see in this. Section 4 begins after Homer's disappearance, covers a long span of time, and it brings us back to present day. So, in the 3 middle sections, we have moving between the distant past and the present day, and you kind of have to keep that clear. There are some historical markers in the story. We get the year 1894 in one place. We also get that the house was built in the 70s, and we're talking about the 1870s. So it's a post Civil War mansion, Southern mansion. And I would imagine that the Griersons were probably slave owners. That's the Southern nobility were slave owners, although all that Emily has now is her manservant Toby, who I'll talk about later as well. Well, with section 5, we get back to the present day where we started in section 1, and uh, we have the big reveal that Homer's body is in an upstairs bedroom in the house, and it has been there for 40 years. And also, there is evidence that Miss Emily has been sleeping with this rotting, decaying, repulsive body all these years. So we get the idea. Remember, she buys rat poison in one of the middle sections. Um, and Actually, that's in section 3. She buys the rat poison, and people think she's going to kill herself because there's some sort of problem going on with her and Homer getting together. And there's also lots of societal pressures about them getting together. And they think she's going to kill herself, but it appears that she kills Homer. Once again, this is all our work as readers, putting together disparate details, just like a detective does. In fact, many people read this story, scholars and critics, as a detective story that makes us the detectives. What happened in that house? What's wrong with Miss Emily? We know that there's a history of mental illness in her family. She has great aunt, crazy great aunt Wyatt, who who all they tell us is she went completely crazy, right? So these are some things to consider. Okay, so those are the five sections. It's remember that the first section and the fifth section take place in present day time in the story's fictional world. The rest are back and forths in the time period before, uh, since the taxes were remitted and until her death. Okay, so let's talk about the characters a little bit. Let's talk about Miss Emily. What type of character is she, and what does that have to do with the theme of the story? Many people jump to the conclusion that Miss Emily is a round character because her appearance changes throughout the story. Don't be fooled by appearances, okay? I would argue, and you can argue with me, that Miss Emily is a stock character. She's that weird neighbor in the old rundown house on the end of the street. She's a figure of mystery. She has become a legend in the town, right? In my view, she's got similarities to, say, a character like Boo Radley. Although Boo Radley from To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee turns out to be not so sinister of a figure, whereas Miss Emily, depending on how you look at her, becomes pretty monstrous and pretty sinister throughout the course of the story. And something that you should consider in your investigation is, um, does society make her that? Or is it something in her nature that makes her that? Or is it her situation with her father? These are all questions that have to be addressed about Miss Emily, right? And as far as her physical changes go, that's true that she has physical changes. She changes visually into something of a monstrous figure over the years, but her inner nature remains static. And we have plenty of evidence of that. We have the parallels of her not understanding death. In the case of her father, she kept his body for 3 days, would not let the doctors or the ministers in, and then finally gave it up when they were thinking of calling the police or something like that. This shows a lack of understanding, a lack of development, human development, right? She doesn't understand death. She doesn't understand passage into the next world. And this will turn out to be a big problem not only for her, but also for Homer Barron. Let's see. And in fact, I want to talk about Homer Barron now. Homer Barron is sort of an enigma. He is a static character. There is much critical debate about Homer Barron and how this story turns out. Homer disappears in uh, in section 4. Last time we see him, Toby, the black manservant that works for Miss Emily, lets him into the house at dusk, which could be seen as symbolic in itself, and he is never seen again. And everybody thinks that he's gone north. But you got to wonder, don't these people in this town know what's going on? Right after that event, we have to go back to, I believe, section 2 in the story to get the following events, and that is a terrible smell starts to come from her house, literally the odor of decay. And why this is significant to us is that if you think about it, um, the judge says something like, she's probably got a dead rat or a dead snake on the property. Well, come on. I don't know if any of you guys have smelled a dead rat or a dead cat or something like that. They smell pretty bad. This smell is way worse, and it's upsetting. And remember, there are no houses around Miss Emily's house, and neighbors start complaining. So these must be people at least a block or more away who can smell this smell. So it's got to be pretty intense. But what about Homer? Homer will never fit into Southern society, being a Northerner. He's described as a Yankee, a Northerner, and also he's got a job. Now you might think this is strange. But let me tell you what the term gentleman used to mean. Okay, in original and sort of ancient usage, or not ancient, but maybe I should say archaic usage, something like that. Um, Gentleman literally meant a man who did not have to work because they had a fortune, or they were well to do, or they were from a powerful family. So Homer, we would admire him as non-Southerners, I guess you could say, or contemporary people, because he's got a sort of a middle management job. He seems to do okay for himself. He's in charge of work crews. They characterize him as a day laborer. To the Southern nobility, he would be seen as just a commoner, even though to us he seems like a self-made man who's out working in the world. I would place Homer in the stock category because ultimately his character trait is that he is the inattainable man desired by a woman. And there are lots of questions about why he is inattainable. Many people point to the little evidence at the very beginning of section 4. Some of the few details that we get about Homer is that he was not the marrying type. He, quote, liked young men, or he liked men, and it was known that he drank with the younger men at the Elks Club. What's going on down at that Elks Club? Okay, so so there's sort of some clues that could lead us to speculate or could spark an argument that Homer is gay. And that he enjoyed Miss Emily's company. They had a lot of fun on their Sunday dates, cruising around town in their wagon while everybody in the town watched, right? And we can imagine if he is a gay man, he likes to hang out with a young, pretty woman. They have a lot of fun together. But then when the moment had to come, when Miss Emily tried to put a move on him or tried to or told him that she loved him and she wanted to marry him, and then suddenly we could imagine. Remember, this is all speculation. Whoa, let me explain something about the dude, right? I mean, that's sort of what probably happened. And remember, Emily knows from experience that she can somebody can die or be killed, and she can keep the corpse and imagine that she is still in a loving relationship with that person. There are parallels to Homer and her father. And in fact, one of the characterizations of Homer, the descriptions we get in the book, is he's driving the wagon, the buggy they ride around in, and he's holding a horsewhip in his yellow gloved hand. Okay. And if you remember, the townspeople have this sort of imaginary, they call it a tableau. This is sort of how they see Emily and her father. And in that tableau, Emily is sort of small and all in white, and behind him, the father, and he's in the doorway. And what does he have in his hand? A horsewhip. Okay. So there's a little parallel there, and she also thinks that she can continue the relationship by hanging on to their bodies after death. Let's see. Some of the other characters are Colonel Sartorus, and he is pretty much a stock character. He's kind of the self-dealing, respected, old-fashioned country judge. We know he's not going to change, right? Just like Homer's not going to change. These are both stock characters. They're developed, recognizable stock characters, which makes them different from flat characters. Okay. I want to talk about Toby a little bit. One of the most enigmatic and mysterious characters in this whole story. He's the black manservant who lives with Miss Emily and takes care of her needs. And um, we don't learn much about him. We see him age as we see Miss Emily age. In fact, at one point they say that his voice grows raspy and husky, and he hardly ever talks, and it's probably because of disuse that it has grown this way, is what the town thinks. So I would put Toby as stock. I think you could make an argument for him to be a flat character since he really only has that one defining characteristic of coming and going with with uh, with the market basket out the door, right? And he lets people in and out. That's a good. You could make a good argument that he's a flat character too. He is definitely static. He's not developing. He's not round. He remains the same except for his physical aging, as does everything else throughout the story. We also have Miss Emily's cousins, who, whenever they think something's going wrong, they show up to town, and they don't really seem to have a loving concern for Miss Emily. They seem more concerned about the appearance of their family to the community, and that's why they show up. They only show up at a couple different times in the story. I would say flat characters because that's their defining characteristic. We don't get any development or noticing from them. We also have mention of Old Lady Wyatt. She is the great aunt of Miss Emily, and we know that she went insane, which gives us some evidence that mental illness runs in this family. So if Old Lady Wyatt, as they call her, went insane, and there were all sorts of whispers and legends about her, good possibility that Emily's case is similar to Old Lady Wyatt. I mentioned Emily's father. I would say that he is either stock or flat. Obviously, he's dead by the time of the story. By the time the story begins, he is no longer in the picture, right? But just the fact that he's sort of the controlling father could make him stock, depending on how much you want to argue and develop your position, or he could just be flat. He's um, he's never going to change. He's dead now, so he can't change, and he's also let's see, he's just got that defining characteristic of being a controlling father. Okay, well let's get into. I want to mention the narrator. I've got to tell you, students, I have read a lot of fiction, both novels um, and short stories, and seen films. And I got to say that the narrator for A Rose for Emily is one of the most unusual and interesting narrators in all of literature. Many people have a difficult time trying to figure out who the narrator is. And I think who is a good term because it can be plural or it can be um, singular. So I would say that this narrator is the town or the townspeople, and that it is a what I would characterize as a collective first person narrator. Okay, so keep an eye on how the narrator changes from section to section. There are some subtle differences, all right? So you want to keep track of those as well. So plot and narrator, very important for this story. Let's see. Let's go into some of the imagery and symbolism. I would say that the overall imagery and symbolism is dominant imagery of decay. Okay. And you can throw in everything with that goes with it. We've got tomb analogies, we've got rotting corpses, we've got the odor of decay, and I'm talking bodily decay. We have the house decaying. And notice that the neighborhood has sort of changed around the house. It's gas pumps, it's factories. This kind of reminds me of Los Angeles. When I taught at Mount St. Mary's College in Los Angeles, it's right by USC. Um, that is the campus, the Doheny campus, is a collection of old Los Angeles mansions where the wealthy people once lived. It was bought by Estelle Doheny, the wife of the millionaire and oil baron Doheny, and it was donated to the church in an order of nuns. The Sister St. Joseph Carondelet made it into a college. But those buildings are still there and they're kept in good shape. But if you go slightly off campus, there are still some of those buildings, but they have completely decayed, and the neighborhood around them has decayed. Yes, it's a very bad neighborhood. 23rd and Hoover, right by USC. Um, it's got these two great universities there, and a smaller college. I believe Hebrew Union College is there as well. But you walk off campus, and you're pretty much in the hood. Okay, so that's something to consider. This decay throughout, um, and the hallmark of that decay is the dust. Dust is prevalent throughout this story. You want to notice something like this. This is symbolic. Okay, remember, a symbol is something that represents something else. We look for symbols when they're repeated, when there's emphasis or attention given to them. And certainly in this story, dust is almost on every page. Maybe there's some on the pages of your book too. But we get dust, and archaic shapes. Even the paper Emily uses is an archaic shape. But we get decay on page 296. We get dust mentioned twice on 296 in paragraph 5. We get dust and shadows on page 300. And here we go. We get dust three times on page 301. 301. Now think about this. You got all this dust. What does dust mean? It literally means static nature, right? Things get dust on them that aren't moved, that aren't used, like maybe your book. No, just kidding. So dust is a very powerful symbol. It's a symbol of static nature, meaning completely unchanging, right? It is found in places that are not frequented or cleaned. It is a sign of disuse, and to some extent decay as well, and a lack of activity, no motion. Dust settles on things that don't move, right? So keep an eye on that dust. Another thing, my lecture title is The Invisible Watch. So I have to touch on that a little bit. This watch, first we see the gold chain on Miss Emily, and we never get to see the watch, though it gets so quiet in her house when the aldermen are visiting to try to collect taxes that they can actually hear the watch ticking. Now, I think this is significant for a couple of reasons. First of all, uh, the watch is invisible, and that is meaning they can't see it. They know it's there, they can hear it. And this is similar to time and the passage of time in the story. We don't see time pass by. We see things like we see people get old, they see things fall apart, we see things regenerate and be rebuilt. That's seen time. But the actual physical time, we don't really see. It's unseen. And as Elvis Presley says, "Ain't it funny how time slips away?" And that's exactly what is going on in this story. Time slips by, decades with a lot that goes on unseen. And I think that also you could look at my lecture title, The Invisible Watch, as a play on words. Remember that first characteristic of literature, language and wordplay. Uh, the Invisible Watch. I almost see this as the townspeople who are constantly watching Miss Emily, who watch her every move, who have expectations. At one point, they think she should kill herself. At another point, they think that they're happy she's getting married. They think she should do this. She should do that. They worry about her. They think she's gone crazy. But do they do anything? Right? So there is a strong element of voyeurism in the story. In other words, of being watched, being under surveillance. And the invisible watch in this town is its townspeople. Okay, so let's see. And there's a great line um, on the first page, I believe. It says that they were confusing time with its mathematical progression, right? And we do get some time markers in the story. For instance, at Emily's funeral, some very old men show up in brushed Confederate uniforms. Now, I imagine that she must die around 1920 or somewhere in that time period. 22 is, I think, a year I came up with once after careful study of the story. And this means these guys had to be really old. So let's say they were 20 in 1865, right? So that would be, you could add 35 years onto that, it's 55, and then another 20. These guys are in their 70s, okay? And what is the symbolism of them showing up in their Confederate War uniforms? They're still living in the past, right? In fact, so much of the story is stuck in the past. The past is a grave that these characters, in many ways, cannot escape from. The southern past of the United States. So let's see. Another thing I want to touch on strong symbolism. Remember, I mentioned deification. of a character or person, meaning making that character into sort of a godlike figure or a demigod or a goddess, however you want to think of it. And I want to focus on Miss Emily. She is very much like a religious figure. She's misunderstood, she's distant, she is unapproachable, but still adored in a strange way by her town. And she is representative of the unwritten law. And lots of religion has unwritten law to it, or revealed law, right? And I want you to notice that throughout the story, the law, in other words, civic law, government law, is invoked on a few different occasions, right? Um, like when the smell comes out, one of the townspeople says, "Isn't there a law?" Don't we say that all the time? And also, it is the law that comes to her door to collect taxes, right? And it is the law that we are sort of left with. This is a town that goes from sort of the Colonel Sartoris type who just runs things however he wants to law and order by the end of the story. So law comes, and law usually resolves issues. And in this case, it did not come soon enough or was not paying attention. Okay, lastly, let me just give you some of the religious imagery for Miss Emily, as she is described as a fallen monument on page 295, as an idol on page 217, paragraph 3. She is described as an idol in a niche on page 296, and she is also compared to angels in colored church windows on page 298. You can't overlook this, right? This is the town deifying her, right? The town sees her as an idol. They see her when she dies as a fallen monument to the Southern past that she is a product of and that she represents. And that may be passing away to some degree with the passing of families like the Griersons. So you might say that the Southern noblesse oblige is a decayed religion, and that Miss Emily is one of the last gods of that decayed religion. Let's see. Okay. And lastly, I kind of want to talk about that these two things that, first of all, the rose in the title. I've got three things. Remember, I'm a three closing preacher, Cougars. So, so the rose in the title. Lots of debate about what the rose is. What is the rose for Miss Emily? Um, and it's a tough question. Perhaps the story itself is a rose offered in her memory. Um, we do know that when we get into the room with Homer's corpse at the end of the story, that the curtains are rose colored and the lights are rose shaded. And perhaps Miss Emily lived in a rose tinted world. She certainly did not understand two of the most important things that everyone has to understand, and that is death and taxes. And those two things are bound by law. Even death is governed by law, right? Funerals, manners of death, suicide, all those things are. So she doesn't get death and taxes. And most importantly, she lacks understanding of time and the passage of time. And think back to that line, that line that is so great about they confuse time with its mathematical progression. Very great line. So I'm going to leave you here with that idea. The law is creeping in throughout the entire story and sort of subduing the chaos. And we have the feeling that things are going to be cleaned up. Things are going to be, even though this was unsettling, lots of blame to go around, that ultimately the law prevails in this story. And on that note, remember that these are the certainties of life: passage of time, death, and taxes, according to the last two, according to Benjamin Franklin, of course. And if you don't understand these three things, or if you're cut off with them, you're pretty much cut off from human society. And here's my third close. There's a very ironic statement. The town is sort of happy. It's a really strange relationship with the townspeople and the Griersons. They are happy when Emily's father dies because she is bereft, and they say finally humanized, possibly the most ironic statement in this entire story. Well, read on, Cougars. I'll look forward to seeing.